Hello, and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here at our new time, 10 a.m. Tuesday mornings. That's Pacific time. And of course, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast, an hour in for Central and Mountain time. And we talk each week for about a half an hour about military doctrine, military history, the practices of great military leaders, and how we can apply these to our civilian businesses and professional careers, although that may be somewhat redundant, our professions, I guess I should say, and distill lessons from them. And for the last several months, we've been talking about Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. And in particular, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about intelligence, the spy versus spy kind, and how we can use what Marine Corps warfighting doctrine tells us about the gathering and use of intelligence in order to advance our professional prospects. So as we do in every good military presentation, we have to have a PowerPoint. as you would know if you've been in the military, you'll remember this. There we go, with our nice military pattern. So everything we do, of course, on the Way to Wow shows revolves around the three pillars of attainment. We focus on this show primarily on the pursuits pillar and the finances realm. Okay? And over the last few weeks, we've talked about the objective of intelligence. We've defined it. We've talked about the challenges the challenges of intelligence and dealing with them. And you can see that there. And then we talked about the characteristics of good intelligence. So if you're interested, if you missed any of those shows and would like to catch up, please go to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@thewaytowow. And you can view all of those episodes as well as previous episodes of my other shows, and I invite you to do that. And while you're there, maybe consider subscribing so that you'll always be notified when a new episode posts. So today we're going to talk about the classes of intelligence, and basically intelligence falls into two classes: descriptive and estimative. Okay, and they are just what they sound like. So some intelligence is descriptive of what currently exists or what existed in the past. It's it's fact-based. Okay, it's about a situation that did or currently exists. Estimative intelligence is looking to figure out what may happen in the future. It's anticipative, okay? And so by its nature, it's less concrete, it's less certain, right? Because it's an estimate, it's estimative. Okay, and so those are the two basic classes of intelligence. We're going to dive into these two classes in more detail. All right. So we're going to talk about descriptive intelligence first. And as I mentioned a moment ago, descriptive deals with either the existing circumstance or the previously existing circumstance. It's past and current. So let's say we're gathering intelligence about one of our competitors. Let's say we're in the coffee business, okay? And of course, if we're in the coffee business, we have to take a look at what is Starbucks doing, okay? So descriptive intelligence would tell us how many markets Starbucks is in currently, how many stores they have, what kind of products they are currently selling, what their volumes currently are, what kind of turnover they have. In this case, I'm talking about financial, how much money it comes in sales, what their net income is, what their profits are, etc. Okay, and all of that can be determined probably from open sources. Now, Starbucks is a publicly traded company, right? It's traded on, I think, the New York Stock Exchange, although I could have the exchange wrong. But in any event, it's required to file certain documents periodically, 10Ks, et cetera, in which 10Ks are basically an annual report. And so we can download that information for free through Edgar, and we can gather a great deal of intelligence of a descriptive nature about Starbucks, okay? Now, likewise, previously existing descriptive intelligence would be, in essence, what was Starbucks like in the past, right? So how many stores did they have? I believe it was founded in 1971. So they had basically, I think, one store in 1971. How many stores did they have by 1980, by 1990, by 2000, by 2010, right? We can get an idea of the scope of their growth, all right? And we could even these days probably plot year by year the changes in the number of stores they had and the number of markets they're in. Okay, because there were times when Starbucks closed stores, including during the recent COVID pandemic, right? We can track their sales, we can track their profitability, we can track the volume of the coffee that they sold, the number of products and types of products that they sold. Right, there were times when Starbucks sold hot breakfast items, and their former CEO Howard Schultz it ended up not liking it because of the smell that it created, and it overwhelmed the scent of the coffee and all that. So they got rid of them, and we could look at all of that. And again, much of that would be available either in their annual reports or in newspaper reports about Starbucks, or in industry trade group information that we could get. So all of this is basically open source, or at least most of it is, meaning it's available to the public, and we can figure out pretty much the whole history of Starbucks. By the way, we could get copies of Howard Schultz's books. He's written at least two, maybe three. And he talks a lot about much of this kind of information, right? So we could even kind of get inside the head of the founder and CEO of Starbucks and gather that information, at least as accurately as he tells it in his books. Okay, and we can be fairly certain about the accuracy of our descriptive intelligence. Okay. All right. So descriptive intelligence essentially breaks down into basic intelligence, current intelligence, and then it's also the base for estimative intelligence. So let's look at each of these three one at a time. Now, when we talk about basic intelligence is much of what we talked about in the descriptive intelligence category, especially in the previously existing. Okay, this is kind of the state of the business, and as well, it's the state of the market that's essentially unchangeable. Okay, so for example, Americans are coffee drinkers. Okay, and that has been true for pretty much the entire history of our country, right? So that kind of basic intelligence, it's not particularly time sensitive. okay? But it's the foundation, if you will, for understanding the business overall, and for understanding individual players within that business. Okay, so if we were looking at it from a military perspective, and the example given in this is the Marine Corps Warfighting Doctrine document. Okay, so this is where all this information comes from. But by the way, this is open source. You can find this this document on the internet and download it as a PDF. Okay, so basic intelligence, as from a military standpoint, would be the climate of a region. Okay, in other words, the tropics are they're generally hot, they're humid. Things may cool down for a few weeks in the sort of dead of winter, but you know, the climate kind of is what it is. Okay, that would be in comparison to current intelligence, where, sticking with the military example for a minute, current intelligence would be, what is the predictions for weather for the next few days or the next week? Okay. And do you see that the climate, I know we talk about climate change, but the reality is the climate doesn't change dramatically from year to year. The climate does change. It has always changed, okay? But the climate doesn't change a lot from, 2022 to 2023. However, weather can vary significantly in even just a few minutes, let alone a few hours or a few days, right? So today here in Los Angeles, the high temperature is 22 degrees centigrade. Tomorrow, okay, the high is supposed to be 17 degrees centigrade. Now, for those of you who work with Fahrenheit, that's a temperature differential of almost 10 degrees, right? That's a big change in how warm the weather is going to be, or how cold the weather is going to be, right? But the climate is not changing really at all in here in Los Angeles over that 24-hour period. Okay, so going back now to our coffee industry example, in particular Starbucks. So basic intelligence would be kind of what's going on in the coffee industry in general, and has gone on, for a long time. So things like, where are coffee beans sourced from? That really doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. The coffee growing region is essentially an equatorial area of the globe. So you see a lot of coffee grown in Central and South America, which is where the equatorial region is. You see it in Africa, and you see it in some Asian countries, right? So just kind of picture where the equator wraps around the globe, right? And then go, kind of north and south of that. That's really the area where coffee is grown, and it's generally grown in sort of, mountainous regions, right? So one of my favorite coffees is Jamaican Blue Mountain, right? It says Blue Mountain right in the name of the coffee. Okay, so those kind of things don't really change. Okay, what does change is the yield from year to year. So whereas where the coffee is grown doesn't really change a whole lot, that's basic intelligence. Current intelligence would be, what is the coffee yield going to be this year? Okay, and although it may be somewhat speculative, maybe it hasn't been harvested yet, still the coffee yield for the current year can be pretty accurately determined based on how many berries are growing on the trees, and the growers' ability to harvest them, et cetera, right? So that would be current intelligence, is what is the yield likely to be, okay? And this body of basic intelligence and current intelligence, okay, then becomes the base for estimative intelligence, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So looking at Starbucks then, if we're trying to figure out, where they've been and where they are, right? So we can look at basic intelligence. Okay, this is where coffee is grown, okay, and which types of coffee are grown where. So there's, generally speaking, there's Arabica and Robusto, I believe, is the other kind, okay? So to the best of my knowledge, Starbucks uses only Arabica beans in their coffees, although there are some experiments going on, I think, with Robusto, because, so just a bit of coffee history. It used to be that almost all the coffee we drank in America was Robusto. And the sort of Folgers and all of those coffees, the sort of mainstream coffees we would get in the grocery store, that's where they came from. The beans were, it was a larger part of the crop. They were less expensive, et cetera, et cetera. And it's why historically, if you can think back, 30, 40 years or more, well, I guess, yeah, a little more than that. Starbucks has been around at least since the 80s. So go back 50 years, typically coffee was more bitter, didn't have as much flavor, et cetera. That was sort of the way coffee was. And one of the innovations that Starbucks brought was Arabica bean coffee, which is thought to be more flavorful, et cetera, richer, deeper color, et cetera. So that's how that's the coffee bean type on which Starbucks and a lot of the other companies, whether it's Peet's Coffee, Seattle's Best, et cetera, that's what they built their business on. So now more recently, there's been some experimentation done with growing Robusta a little bit differently and roasting it differently. And they're finding that Robusto may have the same sort of varied qualities as Arabica. It was really just the way it was grown and made previously that made it kind of drab, okay? So in any event, I'm kind of climbing into the weeds here a little bit, but it's important that we understand this is all sort of basic intelligence, right? And we've noticed coffee prices, have gone up a lot over the years, right? Because of the switch to Arabica beans, among other reasons, right? So basic intelligence would tell us, okay, here's what, here's where Arabica beans are grown. Here's what the crop sizes have been in the past. And here's how that's affected prices for coffee beans that coffee companies buy, okay? Current intelligence then would include not just information on Arabica, but to the extent that Robusto is coming back into the mix, where are the areas where Robusto is grown? What are the crop yields? What are the prices looking to be, right? Because that current intelligence will help us flesh out the picture of where the coffee industry not only is at now, but then it completes that foundation for use in deriving estimative intelligence. Okay. All right. We're doing okay on time here, I think. All right. Let's move on though. All right. So estimative intelligence then anticipates the future, and it's looking at potential developments. Okay. So I've talked about some of these, at least one of these, with the potential sort of bringing back of Robusto beans into the premium coffee mix, so to speak. Okay, so estimative intelligence would look at where are these experiments with Robusto beans at currently, Okay, it might mean going someplace and tasting the coffee that's being made from them if possible. Okay, or maybe even doing some experimentation on one's own to understand it. But certainly to read about what's going on with it, because that could anticipate the future. If indeed Robusto presents the opportunity it appears it might, i.e., to make premium coffee that that has a level of complexity and richness that Arabica does. So then this could potentially open up a huge supply of coffee beans to coffee companies in a way that could dramatically lower their costs. Okay, now it's probably not going to be as low as Robusto was in the past, because the beans have to be treated better than they were in the past, which is what makes them a viable option. Nonetheless, historically, Robusto has been less expensive to grow. It's been a larger part of the coffee crop, as I understand it, right? And so as we look at what's happening with that, we could anticipate, our intelligence estimate of our estimative intelligence about what may happen in the coffee industry going forward would likely have to take that into account if we assess that indeed this Robusto is a possibility for the premium coffee market going forward. Okay, so you have a potential development, the reintroduction, if you will, of another type of coffee beans into the market. That then, what would that mean in terms of growth of stores, growth of markets, sales of coffee, net income and profits for coffee companies, right? So to give one example, in China, Starbucks for many years was the largest coffee company. Okay, now a local, or maybe a better word is domestic, Chinese coffee company called Luckin has become the largest coffee company in China. One of the reasons it's been able to do that is it can sell coffee at a fraction of the cost that Starbucks sells it. So in many ways, Starbucks is a luxury for people in China. I'm talking mainland China, by the way. So the cost is relatively high when it's compared to the income of the typical Chinese person. Okay, so and so as a result, people might go to Starbucks maybe once a week, maybe a couple times a week, maybe 3 times a week. Now compare that to the United States, where I suspect the average Starbucks patron goes there maybe every day, maybe more than once a day. Okay, because although coffee is relatively speaking expensive here in the United States at Starbucks coffee, still compared to our salaries, it's a pretty much an everyday kind of thing, right? So imagine then if Luckin Coffee has been able to grab a huge market share by selling a product at a lower price point that the Chinese will accept in substitution for Starbucks. Okay, so as a result, Starbucks market share has declined in China. All right, well, let's say these experiments with Robusto pan out, and indeed Starbucks is able to bring in this new sort of type of coffee, if you will, and sell it at a lower price point than their Arabica coffee, while still maintaining a quality differential. Okay, what would the future be like under a scenario like that? right? This is a form of estimative intelligence, okay? And this is largely, by the way, what analysts do. So when we talk about, we're talking about analysts in terms of like analysts for large stock trading companies. So UBS has a group of analysts. So does Credit Suisse, and they tend to cover certain markets, certain categories of stocks, and also certain individual stocks. So if a UBS analyst for coffee companies is looking at the market and trying to figure out, what kind of recommendations do I want to make about coffee companies, what they're going to do is start out by gathering descriptive intelligence, right, from probably open sources, like we were saying, okay, and then they're going to develop estimative intelligence based on what they think the future may hold based on potential developments in the marketplace. But their estimative intelligence is not going to be as accurate as their descriptive intelligence. It can't be, because these things haven't happened yet. Okay, they are, for want of a better way of putting it, educated guesses, right, about what may happen in the future. And potential investors will then read these reports that the analysts put together and figure out, they'll make their decisions, at least in part, based on the analysis that they get. So this analysis is indeed intelligence. It's not intelligence the way we sometimes think of it in terms of spying, right? And we don't have to spy on other companies. We don't have to perform industrial espionage to gather intelligence in a useful way to make either investing decisions, if it's analysts, or to make decisions about running our own companies versus what our competitors are doing, okay? The same intelligence can be used for different purposes, right? And so we can take the same UBS analysts reports, and we can use that intelligence to make decisions about what direction we want to go with our companies, okay? So we're coming up on time here. I think that is it for classes of intelligence, right? Yes, it is. Okay, so that is our topic for today in Business Lessons from the Military. And you can see, by the way, probably more distinctively here than some of the previous shows that we've had, where intelligence fits into the larger picture of business, okay? Now, in this case, we're talking about large companies because, I've been using the example of UBS. UBS doesn't cover, mom and pop restaurants or things like that. They cover large companies. Having said that, if I owned maybe an individual coffee shop, I don't mean like a coffee shop in the old days that served food and all that stuff. I mean like a specialty coffee store. Okay, maybe I have a one-off place. Okay, nonetheless, the information that UBS reports could be very useful to me because although in the end they're gathering that intelligence for the purpose of understanding where large amounts of dollars should be invested, still their information on likely coffee bean yields, the direction that the large coffee companies are going in, all of that can help me as I run my smaller business, because if for example, coffee bean yields are very low, I can anticipate that the price of my raw material, coffee beans anyway, is going to go up, right? And so how is that going to impact my business? What decisions do I need to make going forward in order to keep my business going, stay profitable, etc., right? I've used coffee just because, frankly, I had coffee this morning, right? But we could do the same thing in any other business. I read in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the whiskey business here in the United States, especially among craft distillers. So there's a lot of consternation because there is the EU, the European Union, has proposed a 50% tariff on whiskey imported from the United States, okay, which would essentially make it too expensive for most people in Europe to buy. Okay, they're going to buy something else. They'll buy either domestic whiskey or they'll buy some other kind of spirits. Okay, so knowing that's the case, then, what are these companies, that is current intelligence, okay, if you will. It's descriptive intelligence, it's current intelligence. There's negotiations ongoing as to what's going to happen with respect to the tariff, because right now the tariffs are on hold while the United States and the EU try and negotiate a deal, right? So if you're a small whiskey producer where today you're making decisions about how much whiskey is going to be available to sell 4 or 5 years down the road, because that's how long you age it, right? So based on the descriptive intelligence, what does that mean in terms of estimative intelligence? And the article in the journal this morning basically was like, they don't know what the heck to do, right? And so because these are small companies where if they end up with a lot of excess inventory, it could have a very negative impact on the viability of their businesses, right? So some of them are saying, well, I'm just not going to risk expanding into Europe because even though it looks like they may extend the moratorium on tariffs for another couple of years, but what happens then? Because that's about the time I'm going to be ready to sell what I produce today, right? And it's so uncertain, we can't really determine what the potential developments are, right? So all of these things come into play, and this is where gathering intelligence, the quality of the intelligence, the thoroughness of it, and the non-biased nature of especially the estimative intelligence becomes so critical. Okay, so actually we're a little over time now, but wanted to throw that other example in there. So I really, examples oftentimes are the best way to understand a concept. So thank you very much for watching and hanging in there for a few extra minutes. Tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time is my show, People Making Money. My guest is Vaughn Marie Thomas. She's an accountant to small businesses and in trust and estate matters. You may have caught her appearance on my show, Trust and Estates Weekly, a few weeks ago. This time, Vaughn Marie is really going to talk about her career, how she got where she got. And I think you will find her story to be quite interesting. So I invite you to join me tomorrow. And then next week, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, Monday, we'll be back for the next edition of Trust and Estates Weekly. And then 7 days of course, from today at 10 a.m., we will be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military, continuing with our discussion about intelligence. So once again, thank you very much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed it and also, and perhaps more importantly, found it useful for your businesses. Signing off then, Marie, darling, you are my bell. Have a great afternoon, folks.